that was the playground of the majority of children who lived in the western part of Irthlingborough and on the Hayway estate. It had been dug out by the mining company back in the 1920s, and it was a favourite place for local youngsters to spend every day virtually during the summer holidays. And at weekends, again, the banks would be crowded with people picnicking, swimming and fishing. It was, well, it was our Wicksteed Park really, it was our Alton Towers, and again it meant that you could spend many hours down there with just a couple of pence in your pocket, and not even that. And many local youngsters learned to swim down there, and the pump house, the round pump house next to it, had a large, well, I suppose 15-inch pipe which went out horizontally and then down into the water, and that provided a perfect diving board. It was also very close to the mining company's railway sidings, which were always busy as trucks were being loaded with iron ore, ready to be taken later on in the evening off to Ebbw Vale in South Wales or to Scunthorpe to the blast furnaces. And there were always adult eyes and ears about. And believe me, I can tell you from experience, if you did anything stupid during the course of a day, by the time you got home, your mum knew about it.
It's a big ring race we used to swing round, and we were strong, we must have been, because the weed used to cling to your legs, but we ploughed through it, you know. And it was wonderful in summer. Sometimes we thought it was summer about Easter. We couldn't wait, you see. Went in, say, is it cold, you know? And no, now it blew. And then we used to dry on some old rag what we took down, because everything was scarce, you know. Nothing, not like now.
Some people learn to swim holding a piece of a plank of wood. Not really very scientific, but it seemed to work. We all learned to swim, and once you could swim across the width of the reservoir, then you'd made it. You were considered quite competent.
In the summer holidays, we would walk down March Lane, take a picnic, but you did go with your mother then because you got to cross the A6 road. So that was continuation of the meadows and the river. And there was a ford that went across to the fields towards Stanwick. And we used to paddle in the ford, and the cows used to walk through when the farmer was bringing the cows. And nobody ever thought that the water would be contaminated, so we could have got anthrax or whatever. We used to paddle in the ford. It was just like going to the seaside. Sit there on the side with the picnics, didn't we?
Oh my goodness.
Well, we haven't got TB, anthrax.
It was merely one of the backwaters where the stream widened, was very gravelly and sandy, and it provided a safe place for children to play. It was very isolated, so mums would go down with a packet of sandwiches and a bottle of spruce, and there was no bother with children wanting to go for an ice cream because there was no ice cream van down there. It was simply a very Spartan place really in the valley, but one which provided endless hours of enjoyment for local children.
We did have little knitted swimming costumes, and we went down the ford, but it wasn't deep, it was just running water going across. That was just paddling, but just away from the ford there were some deep areas with rushes in and weeds and water weeds, really quite dangerous, but there were adults with us when we went down there. But we never ever thought about danger, did we?
This is the part of the river that is to the east of the old bridge, and a man called Jim Horner had a hut there with boats moored on the bank, and you could hire the boats and row up and down the river, but also the men would swim in that area of the river, and they would even dive off the old bridge into the water, when I think about it now, and swim there. 1947 48 was a really bad winter, and the big meadow flooded and froze, and people would bring their ice skates and were skating on the ice. And so we went down and made our own slides, and I slid, went over, smacked my head on the ice, and they had to take me home, and I had to go to bed with concussion. But these things happened, you didn't think anything of them.
In the early 1900s, it was quite common for the Irthlingborough Skating Association to rent a meadow for the winter, flood it to a depth of 9-12 inches, and then with the cold winters that we had in those days, there was no doubt that the meadow would be frozen. These were simply metal or even wooden blades which were screwed onto the bottom of a working man's boots, because it was the sport of the working man. And there were races, there were time trials, there was just skating for pleasure. And we do have a record that in I think it was 1900, a local man, Percy Perkins by name, he was selected to represent Irthlingborough in the All England Skating Championships, which were to be held at Littleport in Cambridgeshire. So he duly went off on the train, and he went through the preliminary rounds, recording the 4th fastest time, and he qualified for the final of the All England Championship. Unfortunately, the last train back to Irthlingborough was due to leave Littleport station before the start of the final, so he had to withdraw, and Irthlingboro's chance of having a national champion seems to have been lost forever. These were very important bridges in the days of the enclosure because they allowed good access into the big meadow beyond Second Arch, stretching from the Second Arch right through to the River Nene. That was Town Home, that was called, and that was a very important meadow which was used for grazing cattle in the summer months. Not in the winter, of course, because traditionally the valley has always been flooded during the winter months.
The River Nene had bridges over them, which we called arches, and the first one was just down Gosham Road. I'll say Gosham Road because it was when we lived there, now St Peter's Way. The first one over the shallowest backwater was called the first arch. The second one, which was just to the north of the big meadow, was called the second arch, and the third arch was the other side of the big meadow and just north of the railway.
Just over the biggest river.
Yes,
over the Nene.
yes. And we used to go down and paddle in the water, but we would also catch tiddlers, minnows and sticklebacks and things like that to put in jam jars.
The bridges are still very much intact, and if you look underneath the modern route, modern roadway, you can still see the original 19th century brickwork forming the arches, but the streams are not moving now like they were when I can remember them, because the second arch in particular was kept very clear and the water was constantly flowing, and it was there that as 9-10-year-olds we used to go down with our nets and our jam jars and fish out sticklebacks.
Billy Bettles, who lived 2 doors away from us, he was just a little bit younger than me, probably about 5 or 6. He'd gone down playing near the first brook, I think, or second brook, and trying to get tiddlers, but it must have been in the spring because there were tadpoles, and he fell in and swallowed loads of water, one of the group that was with us ran up the lane to fetch his mum and my mum. They came running down. We got Billy out of the water, but I'm sure they were doing some sort of artificial respiration.
Was there? Yes, he did
And
artificial respiration.
out of his mouth came this water with tadpoles in it. I shall never forget that.
As young children, we used to play hayaki. You have a tin, and you say, hayaki, hayaki, I'm going to count, and then you count. This is the counting game. They go and hide, then you have to find them. We used to go down what we used to call the big tip, and at the side of the big tip was a small hill, and covered in trees, and you used to go and hide.
With the farmer, we didn't bother with the farmers really, we just played in the fields as we wanted to. And the hay would grow really tall, and so we would crawl through the hay, playing hide and seek. And when I think about it, we must have flattened an awful lot of that hay down. But it was really enjoyable.
There was an old Arnold machinery up in the Calibanks. And now big round things with turrets and things where they used to have the pulleys and chains, whatever they had. And it was all old machinery, of course. They had another one coming out of the ground like that. That was the submarine. The big round one was our battleship. We used to tie ropes from that top section down to the battleships. It was quite a height in the middle, probably 20 foot. And the rope used to come down. And we used to get other pieces of rope, get on the rope and slide down.
When the hay was cut, and there was a big haystack down in on the edge of one of the meadows, and we used to climb up onto the top and slide down and brought all the hay down. Look, a crowd of us doing it, and someone said, "Here's Russell Gates," and he's the farmer. And we were terrified. We turned and ran all the way home, but the farmer chased the two bigger boys right across the meadow.
Yes.
And I'm sure he must have walloped them and he caught
Oh
them,
yes.
which you couldn't do these days. You just simply couldn't.
And then those are the Black Hills. They were fuel for the cinder plant. And they'd just lay there, acres and acres of them. And of course it's like coal really, and it's black as hell. And we used to have an old rigid motorbike. Of course you can imagine how it was. And these hills just go up and down like this. We used to go alpha leather over these black hills. We were black. we didn't go home. We didn't go home like that. So we just go down to the reser and clean off.
The hedgerows, wonderful. I suppose they've all been cut back now, I don't know. But they were so old that you could walk through the middle of a hedgerow, and the branches, you could sit on the branches.
Thick.
And we made rooms inside these hedges. It's something you just don't see now.
The whole area used to have oak trees, and there's one particular oak tree was a great huge thing about 80 foot tall. And you could go up with a great big trunk halfway across this room, and we used to go up there and sit in the middle.
Usually after tea on a Sunday, especially from the Hayway and Allen Road estate, families would set out and take a stroll across to Higham, which would take, I suppose, about 2.5 hours. And it meant going down past the tip, past the Ring Reservoir, over the railway tracks, over Stagram Bridge, Stagram Meadow, where if you were lucky there might still be a few mushrooms there, but most of them would have been collected in the morning, and then as far as Higham Wharf. And then we would come back and arrive home 8:30, 9 o'clock, I suppose, on a Sunday evening, and we would finish the day with cold new potatoes and perhaps a slice of baked pudding, Yorkshire pudding of course.